Did RFK Jr. win the debates? That's what a lot of people are asking. But how is that possible? Because he didn't participate. Well, if you go to his X, formerly Twitter page, you can see that he's posted here a live broadcast receiving over 7 million views of the real debate, in which he staged a separate debate in which he could respond to Trump and Biden to level the playing field, so to speak. So it's an interesting, you might think of it as a political stunt, because he wasn't invited, he wasn't allowed to join, so he went out and did it on his own. Now, there's a long history of third-party debate candidates being pushed out of the major political parties, major debates that they have, and thus the audience, the American people, don't always get other perspectives. So let's break it down. Let's talk about his performance. We have a little clip here, but I first want to get into his vocal condition. You may have noticed, obviously, he has a gravelly, shaky voice. Now, this is a rare neurological condition called spasmodic dysphonia. They don't know exactly what causes it or exactly how to cure it, obviously. It's thought to be maybe related to illness, stress, some rare neurological conditions, maybe a combination of those things. But that's what RFK Jr. has, and he's received treatments for this. So we talked about this in an interesting article from the LA Times, and he even mentions that he has titanium in his vocal cords, doing something in there, that he had a surgery in Japan, that the surgery wasn't approved in the US. So he kind of had, you might think of it as an experimental surgery to help improve his voice. I believe he's had other, therapies and attempts to treat this condition, but it just gets in the way for him, obviously. So he's talked about the frustrations as somebody who relies on his voice. He's been an environmental lawyer. He had a radio show. He's been a university lecturer, a professor, and now he's a presidential candidate. So it's an interesting barrier for him to struggle with this condition. He even mentions the irony, of his father and uncle being one of the some of the most prolific, iconic speakers in modern history, in recorded history, and yet he struggling to express himself because of this condition. I think there's an interesting connection here relating this to Biden. So Biden has had a long documented stutter. So for most of his career, it wasn't really too noticeable. At least when you go back and look at old footage of him, he seemed to speak very fluently. So his Biden's very poor, disastrous performance in the debates, you can't just chalk it up to his clinical documented stutter. There was obvious decline and other things going on there that resulted in Biden doing so poorly in that debate. But people weren't happy with Biden's debate performance. Independent voters, according to Frank Luntz, who did focus groups with independent voters or swing or undecided voters, I should say, that were also not happy with Trump's performance as well either. So RFK Jr. is trying to join the conversation. Okay, so let's take a look here. We have a brief part of this exchange with the sort of mock moderator here, John Stossel. So let's see his response to this question.
CNN has somehow found a child care crisis in America. Somehow Americans raised children for years. Now there's a crisis because it costs too much. Is that something government did or can fix?
Well, the reason there's a crisis is because the economy with the middle class is gone. So in order to pay for a home, you need 2 jobs or 3 jobs. So oftentimes I'm running into people who have 4 jobs between the couples. The couple used to be, when you and I were growing up, mom stayed at home or a parent stayed at home and took care of the kids. that doesn't happen anymore. Now, both parents, in order to hold on to that home, need to be working. So we do have a child care crisis in this country. And it's because of the destruction that both these men contributed to of the American middle class. And neither of them is offering any way to restore the middle class. Child care for black Americans, John, is 37% of income. A single child. Oh, and nobody can afford that. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to wind down, I'm going to balance our budget, which is what President Trump promised to do, but I'm actually going to do it because why? Because it's existential. If we don't have the courage to do that, no matter what the cuts are, we have to do that or we are going to cease to exist as an influential nation. And but we cannot cut our way out of this debt. We have to build new industry. We have to build GDP. And one of the most efficient ways of building GDP is through child care, through guaranteed child care. There's a 22 times return on investment. As I said, every $1 million we spend on military weapons creates 2 jobs. Every $1 million we spend on child care creates 22 jobs. And we need to grow our way out of this budget death spiral. And one of the ways we're going to do that is by providing child care, by taking away $500 billion from the military.
Back to the CNN debate.
Okay, so you can see there in that example, you have on display his, condition, the spasmodic dysphonia. And it's interesting, if this were any other scenario in which a medical condition could potentially be a barrier to employment, I would say, you can't consider it too closely. There's, legal protections to prevent employers from discriminating against somebody with a handicap. But do you think that it's different with voting for president, a presidential race? I wonder how much can we hold this against him in his ability to communicate clearly, to be a leader, to express himself and articulate his ideas. Is this something that we can use as a criteria for, deciding to vote or not vote for a candidate with him or with Biden as well, too, with like a stutter? So assuming that was his only issue, Biden and the stutter, could we hold that against him in voting for a candidate? When it comes to voting for president, I think that apparently anything is fair game. We can use all of our judgments and, prejudices, or people do at least use them to vote for president. So I think that this is a barrier to him in being able to communicate to potential voters, and I think it is holding him back. But no matter what he does, his hands are going to be tied. You can see the polls here as a non-Republican or Democratic candidate. Kennedy is not breaking 10% of the polls. And as the election grows closer, you're going to see that number getting even lower. So it's just going to be, Trump versus Biden, and Kennedy's numbers are going to drop even further as November comes around. The real concern is, will he take more votes away from Trump or Biden? And that's really not clear. I think both candidates, both Trump and Biden are quite concerned about that. There was also reports of Republican donors and activists working to put Kennedy on the ballots in swing states because they thought it might help him. We have an interesting dynamic coming up this election. So it looks like no matter what he does, even if he was the most perfect, articulate speaker, that Kennedy would struggle here as an independent candidate. But going back to his performance here in this video, I want to point out a few things. He answered the questions directly and clearly. All of the questions that I saw that he responded to, he responded very clearly with little to no hesitation. He had a clear response for those questions. Now, he might have had more, coordination with the debate moderator in being able to respond to these things, but presumably he didn't know everything that CNN was going to bring up, which he did respond to a lot of those things in the debate. But Trump and Biden didn't respond to a lot of questions. They got off topic. They made false statements. RFK Jr., he responded clearly, coherently. He seemed much more present and capable and able to respond to the questions despite his gravelly voice. You may disagree with some of his arguments, some of his personal views, but his ability to respond to questions in a debate and to express himself, I think we can say is superior to what we saw in Trump or Biden. So he's using strong gestures. He's making a direct connection to the audience and the cameras. He, displays strong posture. And even though his voice is gravelly, I think it still is okay. It's still pretty strong. He still seems, pretty fluid generally with his speech. So a lot of people think that he won the debate, given this. Massive numbers on X. That's another interesting. So I know here, I think about 50 million people watched the Biden-Trump debates, which apparently was down from the last election, the first debate, which got over 70 million votes. But RFK Jr. doing his own thing, putting it up on his Twitter page, his X page, got 7 million views, not including all the various clips that you would have seen getting passed around. So I would grade his performance here in this debate, from what I've seen, as a B+. He did very well. He spoke very clearly, coherently. He answered the questions. He had strong body language and posture, and his voice, considering everything, was pretty strong. So I think it's pretty fair to say RFK Jr. did better than Trump and Biden in this debate, in his delivery, in his performance, in his speaking skills. Now, when it comes to policy, your personal views, who you feel like is the best leader to run the country, Biden, Trump, RFK Jr., that's a different question. And it looks like we're only going to have the two choices rather than being able to decide on Kennedy too. But what did you think about his debate performance here? Do you think he should be able to participate in a debate with Trump and Biden? Or do you think that because he is not a realistic candidate per se, because he's not voting high enough, do you think that that would serve as a distraction from the other primary candidates? So let me know your thoughts on RFK Jr.'s debate performance and his speaking skills. Let me know in the comments below your thoughts, and I'll see you next time.